Hello everyone, Leafreed here, and today I have The Giver by Lois Lowry. This really surprised me. This was a book we were issued in high school to read, and I thought, I vaguely remember what this book was about, so I thought I'd go back and give it, a second shot, basically. And, I didn't expect much out of it. A lot of the things we read in high school kind of, so-so, but this one really affected me. It was very emotional at the end, maybe because there's some very simple themes in here that really resonated with me as an adult rather than as a young teen, and it's marketed as young teen literature, but I think it's a lot more advanced than that. So what is The Giver about? Well, it's this very sort of dystopian or utopian novel where essentially you have the perfect, equal society where everyone is essentially made more or less equal, where this kind of, they can control the weather, genetics, food, everything. And so they kind of look at what would be this perfect society where it wasn't really about equality, it was about sameness and trying to make everyone same and trying to have a completely controlled system, basically a controlled society. So in this society, people they have special medication similar to Soma, almost, from Brave New World, which takes away all pain if you get hurt or fall down, which is very rare. No one can see in color. Everyone's lives are heavily regimented. There are no family units, but people are assigned couples and assigned children, but they're called new children or new people or something. And so the whole society is just hyper controlled. So, you are, there's like a council of elders that, will assign you at the age of 12, basically your entire role in society, your job and, the everything from until your death. And so the main character of the book is called Jonas. And so he's a 11 becoming 12-year-old boy. And so he's going through this final initiation ceremony. And so it talks about how, from his perspective, there are ages 1 to 12. There's a ceremony each year until the 12th year, which is the final ceremony, and then you just kind of live the rest of your life. And so through Jonas's perspective, we get to see the creation of this society. So it's a kind of like 1984 in that sense, where we have a main character and the society reveals itself through that main character's actions. But in this book, it's much more succinct and much more simple because it's through a child's perspective, and I feel in that way a lot more impactful. Another thing that Jonas says is, there's apparently speakers and listening devices everywhere. So he says, some of the social conditioning that he goes through, the way it's written about it, it's not, very blunt. It's very kind of show don't tell. So for example, Jonas, takes an extra apple one time because he noticed it changed when he was tossing it up and down. And what he doesn't realize later it gets into is that he actually saw color in it for the first time. And another thing about Jonas that makes him interesting and unique is that he's one of the few people in the society who has pale eyes. And so Jonas essentially has, color in his eyes. They're not black or brown. But again, because if people only see in monochrome, they can't really know that, except he just has pale eyes. And because of this, he's kind of different and unusual, but not too different that he's bullied or anything. So anyway, Jonas, keeps this extra apple, and it's later on that they have an announcement on the speaker saying, extra food that is taken outside of rations is essentially, forbidden. But they don't call them out specifically. They just have a general announcement, but Jonas knew it was about him. So it's a very hyper-controlled environment. No one's suffering, no one's in pain, no one's starving, and everything is controlled and sedated. there's this whole chapter where they talk about the stirrings, where upon becoming 12 years old, he's also, developing puberty. So they still have that, but they take a pill daily to suppress their sexual desires, essentially. And so even that aspect of lust is removed from society. So it's totally controlled and completely safe. And it shows the essence of, I don't know what to call it, like almost kind of roboticism versus extreme humanity. And so it's kind of setting up this environment, what it's like, what their daily life is like. There's certain expressions where someone, if they say they've offended them, or if they've had some kind of experience, and they say, "Oh, I accept your apology," when they apologize, it almost was a robotic response. They do have emotions, though. They're not totally lifeless, where his little sister Lily, who's not biologically related to, essentially says that she saw this group of, they don't call them by their age, they call them like 7s or 6s or 11s, as if they were different people or group. And she was saying that this group of 7s wasn't obeying the rules because they were from a different community, and she was irritated with them. And so she was talking it out, and they said, "Oh, well, maybe they didn't know what the rules were," and they're all very calm and concise about it. And she kind of says, "Okay, yeah, no, I guess you're right. I guess I didn't think what it would be like to be them." And so all of their emotions are highly, highly regulated and controlled, essentially. And honestly, the first half of this book is pretty much is almost as boring as the society it's describing, because it's just going through the motions, essentially. And there's also a boy named Asher, who's kind of like the goofy kid who his whole story is that he confuses words for different meanings. Instead of asking for a snack when he was younger, he asked for a smack. And so that's what he got. And so he's kind of the goofy character. And Jonas, his disposition is, he's kind of yearning for, something more, something real. And he's kind of, viewing and observing the world with a detached kind of otherness. It's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Or he's a real observer. And he's mostly just kind of going with the flow. And what occurs is that at the ceremony of 12, another thing too about this society I found very interesting is that when you turn 9 years old, you are assigned your personal bicycle. So no one actually has cars or vehicles, but they do have personal bicycles with their ID and name attached to it. And even then, even though, again, they're super controlled, they said one of the most commonly broken rules was that the elder siblings or the parents would teach them how to ride the bike beforehand, so that they could ride it properly when they received their bike when they turned 11 or 10 or something. And there's this whole thing about when you turn 8, you get a certain front button vest that you can button it up yourself. And so everything is so highly regulated. There's still ceremonies, there's still some level of freedom and free will, but it's never, you can still see that there's some level of free will, but it's still so highly controlled. They have curfews, and you just find out these weird rules. And what I love about the book is the way it just introduces them throughout the course of the book, even at near the end of the book when they're still like planning stuff. You're just revealing more and more rules about this society. So that's what I really like about this. It gets the ball moving, but it doesn't take the time to explain every single facet of the society that you'd want to know at that moment. It's slowly just constantly revealed to you. And what I love about this book, and just the pacing of certain movies that this reminded me of, is that it's a revelation kind of story where there's certain pieces of knowledge and context that gives you an inference into a deeper truth about the society and what they do. And it's the insights that it gives you into the ceremony of 12 when you're becoming your final roller, for example, is kind of the main focus. And so Jonas's father is a caretaker at a child's ward, and his mother is a I think they call them mother and father, but it doesn't have the same meaning. And his mother works at like the Department of Justice or something, and she's kind of like a judge or something, but it doesn't really go into her. It goes more into his father's role a lot more, because he nurtures children, takes care of them. And one of the developments in the side stories is he brings home this child that they're all numbered and they're assigned names by, again, the Council of Elders. And so he brings home this child that is a rare exception, because no one's supposed to have more than 2 children, 1 male, 1 female, perhaps. And that is also how they refer to certain people. They say, oh, he was a 12 male. They'll address each other as male and female, which is a very highly, again, scientific, materialist kind of vibe to it, anti-human. And so he brings home this child that isn't doing well, he's not growing well, doesn't play well with others. And so he thought, well, I'll just take him home and kind of nurture him. And even though it's totally against the rules, I'm also going to give him a name, Gabe. And so that's kind of a developing side story throughout the narrative. But anyway, when it comes to the ceremony of 12, Jonas is talking about his experience, his friends becoming assigned to things. Asher, his friend, who is the goofball, is assigned to the director of recreation, which was very appropriate. So it's kind of like makes sense. Okay, people are assigned spouses based on their personality types. They were assigned jobs based on their experience and natural dispositions up to the age of 12. And okay, that it makes sense. And you said there are some stories about some kid who wanted to be an engineer was instead assigned to waste management, who was so fed up apparently he drowned in the river or something. And so they're going through the ceremony. They're called up one by one, assigned their roles, and when it comes to Jonas's turn, number 19, they say number 20, and the kid beside him goes up and he's assigned his role. And so this whole time there's this aberration with the whole audience is wondering, what's the deal? They skip number 19. They all know it, and Jonas, as well as everyone else, is incredibly nervous and apprehensive about the situation. And so it finally comes to the point where okay, we are aware that we skipped number 19, Jonas, and they come forward and they're like, congratulations, Jonas, you have not been assigned a role, but you have been selected. And they're like, okay, and they say you've been selected to be a receiver. And it's kind of this different thing where the receiver is this very special role. Only one person in the whole community does it, and it's this old man. And so what develops happening is Jonas is like, okay, I guess this is a weird thing. I'm going to be, with this old man. And he goes there and, what's the point of being a receiver? And he says, well, a receiver is someone who has to receive the memories of the old world, of the real world. And actually probably my favorite part in this whole book, and also the writing there, the font is also very large, very nicely paced. I can't find the exact part, but my favorite part is when they're all assigned their rules and their rule books. And I love this moment, this inflection point in which the trajectory of Jonas's path in life is completely shot off in this other direction. And it's very much the call to adventure in the hero myth story. And he's very reluctant at first, but of course he accepts it. But what I love, my favorite scene in this book, is when he's assigned his rules. And so everyone gets a rule book about their new job, their new role in society, until they die, basically, until they enter the house of the old, which is retirement. And at the end of the life, they have this thing called release, which we'll get into later. They're released from the community. And so most people's rule books are like, okay, this is your job, this is kind of what you're going to be doing, this is you're reporting to in the morning, this is your training, blah, blah, blah. And Jonas's list of rules as a receiver is really interesting. It's basically like, do not take any medication, do not talk about any of your work with the receiver outside of the receiver's work. You can ask questions to anyone, you can break rules, and my favorite one, the last one, is that you can lie. And to Jonas, this is like, it was unthinkable to tell a lie. It was impossible. And my other favorite thing is you're not supposed to tell anyone about the dreams you're having. So it's this amazing, wild thing where you're in this hyper-conformist, egalitarian society, and you've been selected to be a subversive element by that very society. And this scene, this moment where the unraveling of the architecture of reality is imposed upon this young boy is, to me, so cool. I actually realize as I'm recording this, some of my favorite stories and movies are based around architecture, for lack of a better word, or the discovery of fake architecture. So stories like The Matrix, Dark City, this journey in which someone is discovering the system of control around them and how it's flawed, to me, is one of the most fascinating tropes. And it just becomes a series of revelation and discovery, and not only discovery of how the system around you is created, but a discovery of who you are as an individual that is able to understand and discover it. And so Jonas, he goes to his new position, and he says, this old man whose name you never know, and he says, well, I'm the old receiver, you're the new receiver. It's like, okay, what do we do? It's like, well, take off your tunic. They all wear these weird monochrome tunics apparently, and he puts his hand on his back, and he's able to transfer to him memories. And he says, and he's been warned, and another thing he gets even before he gets there is he's warned that to be the receiver is the most important and unknown and mysterious and apparently painful job of the entire community, but he doesn't know why. And so he's super nervous, and so he puts his hands on his back, the old man, and he's able to give Jonas memories of the real world. And so his first memory is about riding a sled down this slope, essentially. I'm not sure if that's like a reference to Rosebud or something. I don't know. Maybe it's just totally whatever. And Citizen Kane, but maybe it's just a coincidence. But that's the first memory he gives him, and he feels cold for the first time. He sees more color again for the first time. Previously, it only came to him in flashes when things would suddenly pop in. And the first color he actually sees is red, which I think is accurate in the development of language and color. Apparently, besides black and white, the next thing they see is red, or maybe it was yellow for the sun. I don't actually remember, but anyway. So Jonas begins experiencing reality, like a depth to reality that's greater than this, and it's such an interesting facet to look at. And so what happens is that he gives him that memory. He's like, oh, that was kind of nice, and I can't believe I can experience these things, or these things were possible. And it's like he's literally gaining new senses, new experiences that no one is able to tap into, and he starts to become essentially more human. It reminds me a lot of other stories about robots that are designed to look or be like people, but are learning how to be human. Very much reminds me of also the main-ish character, John from Brave New World. The savage who becomes the civilized savage. Who actually already understands the depth and the intensity of the human condition and brings it to the civilized, sterile society. But it's the opposite in this version. It's Jonas, who exists within that civil, sterilized society, being allowed to experience the full breadth of reality slowly. And so, of course, at the end of the session, the point we're approaching is that Jonas says, well, if I'm the receiver and you're no longer the receiver, what do we call you? And he says, the giver. Yes, he says the thing. And so the giver, this old man again, whose name we never get, is the kind of the other main character, and basically brings them through the experiences of, everything from, a happy Christmas morning to the poaching of an elephant and a baby elephant calling out for its dead mother, Napoleonic warfare, and every emotion and experience under the sun. So he's being exposed to the human condition, the reality, and he essentially becomes increasingly disgusted and infuriated with the people around him who are unable to see and feel and even taste. They don't mention taste, but near the end, again, they just keep hitting you with stuff that, like the giver says, like, the one memory I want to give you is one of my favorites. And he's like, no, don't give it to me. You can keep it. And he says, well, just so you know, it's the memory of music. So even then, at the end, you just find out how deprived of the human experience they are. So how little they feel, how little they experience life, and how controlled and unhuman they are. And it's the ideas of the idealistic, the blurring between the lines of equality and like identicalness or sameness, where one way to create a perfectly stable society is to get rid of all major differences and placate all pain and suffering and create this painless but also empty world, empty of purpose. And so Jonas is, he essentially, like, there's this one passage, I can't find it, but he basically says, he basically describes everyone else as NPCs. And so the funniest thing, like, this book really is, I think, more relevant to me today than it was when I was forced to read it in high school, because I know the story of this boy going on a truth journey, a revelation journey, and engaging with not only higher ideas, but higher emotions, forbidden experiences, and trying to feel. It's the correlation of pain equaling reality and suffering in a way being beautiful, and the idea that even the negative, bad, chaotic aspects of humanity are, even though they, when you control and make everything super safe, that reduces the ability for extreme pain, but it also reduces the ability for extreme pleasure and for extreme ideas like nobility and love and warmth and humanity in the face of the opposite. So you reduce the extremes to a monochrome middle in which nothing of great import really flourishes. And removing the limiters on that and feeling the intensity for the first time is something that I feel in my personal life, I guess. I mean, I'm always looking for books and movies and stories that really grant me a greater sense of the human condition and a greater sense of purpose, and something in which brings us closer to apotheosis through art. And I think that's what people kind of yearn for at the end of the day. And again, this book does it so simply and directly. And I remember hating this book when I read it in high school, but now I'm like the second half of this book, again, the first half was kind of like, whatever, as kind of exposition establishment, but the unraveling of everything is, I found it very emotional. It's this final kind of letting go. And so the way the book kind of concludes is that there's this other really weird, cool mechanic that reminded me of another idea I've heard elsewhere, which is the morphogenic field by Rupert Sheldrake. It's a pseudoscience because this guy could never actually positively test for this concept. So it's really just a theory, and it's kind of treated non-seriously, but I know there's lots of things like, gravity is a theory, evolution is a theory. So the morphogenic field theory is the idea that that our thoughts are originating from somewhere else, but also the thoughts that we put out there, there's some kind of field around the earth or an unseen field in which we can influence the thinking of other individuals. And the way he tried to, practically test this so it could be a real science is that he showed a bunch of Rorschach diagrams to a bunch of people in the 70s in America, and kind of said, oh, people saw like birds, cats, dogs, or whatever. And so he revealed what it actually was, and it was actually a dog. And then did the exact same experiment within like a year in Australia on the other side of the planet. And what his findings were, allegedly, is that when he did the same Rorschach experiment, 30 plus percent more people saw the dog. And so it's this idea that, we're all collectively, like the collective unconscious, we're all forming each other's thoughts. And there's something that the collective unconscious, this global mental network, that the idea that every mind is actually connected subliminally in some fashion is real. That it's not just a concept or a nuanced idea, that it's in fact a real thing. And of course, people looked at his research and like, whatever. No, they didn't really take it seriously. It's like, no, maybe. And I'm sure he probably repeated the experiments and probably had like negative results, but it doesn't matter. It's an interesting concept. And so it's a concept in this book. I mean, I don't think it's directly inspired by it, but it's the same idea, in which that, another side story is that the previous receiver that the old man tried to give his memories to, so brutal, was this girl who was also Jonas's age, and he basically gave her very happy, fluffy emotions, didn't want to overwhelm her. But then after he had given her most of her positive memories from the past, he only had bad ones to give her. And it became so intense for her that she basically kills herself. And the sci-fi aspect of this is that when she kills herself, it became a huge deal because apparently upon her death, all of the memories stored within her were released back into society. So it's this weird thing where they have some sci-fi thing where the collective memories of the humanity and the collective unconscious and those emotions are being stored within a single individual. And so that's why it's such a painful occupation, is that you have to take on all the sins of humanity. So, all the pain and all the reality, and kind of store it within yourself and then pass it on at the end of your lifetime. And there's a whole twist where you find out that, I'll spoil it for you, but it turns out that this girl who, ended up taking on all these awful memories, she basically applied for release, and you find out through that story that release from the community, as you can already kind of assume, is actually suicide. But the way they administer it, it's shocking but not shocking, is that it's basically some kind of poison in a syringe. But what got me is that she said, usually a doctor injects it into you, but she said, actually I want to do it myself. So she injects herself with the poison, knowing that she's going to die because it was so awful to take in all those memories. And because of that, they added a new rule, which is that as a receiver, you cannot apply for release. So you cannot apply for suicide. And when Jonas first reads the rule book and he sees that, he's like, why would I apply for release? That makes no sense. Because it's the mental pain and the physical pain that he feels of all these people as well. And so, the plan that they hatch open is that Jonas through this experience says, it was wrong of us to remove all these emotions and these feelings from people. And and I forgot the last twist before I move on is that it turns out that girl who ended up committing suicide was the biological daughter of the old man. It's brutal. It's a brutal book. And it's funny, what I really ended up thinking a lot about was Neon Genesis Evangelion. Like the same kind of, school kids going about their day, and then they have to deal with some super amazing, traumatic, metaphorical event where they're on some battlefield in the Napoleonic era or, World War I or II. And then they have to go back to their normal school life, and they're also developing as individuals but being exposed to this other information, and they have these dual lives while looking at the people around them and wondering about the fate of humanity. And it's very similar. This is like Neon Genesis for kids or something. But of course, near the end of the book, what did they conclude? That Jonas is so fed up with society that he decides, along with the giver, that he is going to escape and run away. And the idea and the concept is that when he actually leaves the environment, that there's some force field apparently that once he leaves, all those memories will return to the people, and it'll wake them up, and it'll start the awakening essentially. And so that's his plan that he puts into action. And the last few chapters of this book are incredible to me because it just, I don't know, it's a simple story, but it's just that, it goes through all the things that he's terrified of being caught at night, breaking the rules or the regulations. Also, the other aspect is that Gabe, very much like, I don't know, Gabriel the angel, his father, reverse. Jonas was giving, his memories to the baby so that it would sleep peacefully, so that it would be, taken care of essentially. And so, and that would keep him quiet, sleeping at night. And what happens is that, when Jonas isn't there one evening and they, his father takes Gabe in for an evaluation, he ends up crying the entire time. And so the council, or by the regulations and the rules, they deem him unfit for existence and plan him for release. So, he's giving this extra care and attention to this child, and just because of the rules and regulations, he has to be released. And, Jonas thinks, does he understand what that means? And so the giver basically is able to, there's this other case where also this woman gives birth to twins, which is an accident. And so because they can't have overpopulation, one of the twins has to be released. And so the way they decide which one to release is which one weighs less. So Jonas, the giver's like, oh, well, actually, you can see every single thing. And at this point, the giver kind of wants to show him the reality of what things are. And so there is a recording of this procedure and his father works with little kids. He loves them to death. He takes care of them, but it shows him very mechanically taking the twins, weighing each one. One was 6 pounds, one was 5.5. And so he takes the 5.5 pound one and he releases it. And no one has ever seen this release process. And he takes this baby and takes a syringe, and because the veins are too small, he sticks it into the forehead of this infant and pushes in the liquid, and it causes it to spasm, go limp, and he puts it in a disposable container box and puts it into a chute. And it's only until a few seconds after the baby's body goes limp, that Jonas realizes, he recognizes the face of one of the soldiers in the war who also died, and only Jonas realizes that it is dead. And he just is inconsolable in that moment, and he says, how could my father do that? And the giver is kind of like, I don't know, the giver's like, look at this Live Leak video, look at it, do you see? And Jonas, at the same time that he realizes that this infant has been killed in the same way this poor soldier was killed on the battlefield, he also realizes that his father doesn't even understand what he did, and that the perception of human life is not within his mind's eye. And to lose something so valuable and to have someone be so ignorant of it, like, it's such a real emotion, such a real scene, such a real experience. And Jonas says, I can't do this anymore. Can't do it anymore. And so that's when he hatches his plan to leave and hopefully, release his memories and, get out of society. And, that pitiful poignant moment is, I don't know, to me, like, this whole experience is so intense that it's like taking a child on the verge of puberty and thrusting upon them all the deeper and realer emotions and dealing with pain and sorrow and strife, but also never losing sight of hope. And again, I did not expect this, coming back to this old book that maybe I didn't even fully finish. But it is so intense, and it gets more intense and more revelations about, what is color, what is music, what is the human experience. And by the subtraction of it, we begin to appreciate it more and more, like someone coming into a new sense. It's incredible. I knew someone, actually, like an acquaintance really, who could not hear for 18 years of his life, but due to some miracle surgery, he could hear for the first time and could hear music. And it's funny, people were recommending him everything to listen to, including rock music. And this one girl, she was just terrible at singing, but she sang this song, and to him everything was beautiful. Everything was beautiful because he'd never heard it before. It was incredible. I don't know. And so anyway, the final part of this book, where it goes on for about a few chapters, but it just talks about Jonas's struggle, where he finds out that Gabe is scheduled to be released, and so he basically steals his father's bike, puts Gabe in the passenger compartment in the front, and decides to just leave and just goes. He just leaves across the bridge and just keeps going. And there's this whole, to me, a montage where he's traveling at night. He's stolen some food for them to eat, but he's basically going deeper and deeper into the wilderness. During the day, they hide under the foliage while planes go by back and forth overhead looking for them. He keeps transferring memories into Gabe, memories found cold so that they can be sensed by the heat-seeking planes, apparently. And it describes as Gabriel's also being light-eyed with curly blonde locks, and they kind of huddle together, these two poor children. And God, it's so painful to see a 12-year-old boy kind of take care of like a 1-year-old or 2-year-old, or whatever, how old Gabe is, and for them to just survive in the wilderness. And there's just no point, they've ran out of food, and he has to hunt, and he's able to make a makeshift net and catch a fish and just bash its head in and kind of eat it raw and barely survive. And they keep biking and biking and biking until soon they see less and less. Obviously, they pass the houses, but soon even the road starts to run out and becomes gravel. More and more wilderness, less and less planes coming overhead. And he's hungry, he's starving, he's exhausted, he's never pedaled this hard in his life before, and he's going through this immaculate suffering. And it's really an emotional scene, because it's about the pain and about the beauty and the depth of life and what he's going through, the sacrifice he's going through, not keeping himself alive, but this child he has. And it's so emotional, because what it is he's embodied the hope and the knowledge of the whole world is on his shoulders, and it's simply because of what he knows, and he's carrying the essence and the fire of humanity within his little self. Like he is the embodiment of truth and humanity, and the truth they don't want to get out, and they're hunting him down for it. And it's pretty Christian as I'm saying it right now, as I realize, but it's that deep idea, and he's carrying the truth and the hope and the essence of humanity with him, and suffering terribly for it. And the final scene, they're going outside, even the limits of nature, and now snow begins to fall, and it's just like that very first memory he was given by the giver. And there's some cryptic things at the end, I don't know what to make of them, where he said, "I've been here before." And so it's obviously the memory that he was given. So, but I'm not sure if he's implying that maybe his specific ancestor or something was from that area. And so he is on this hill, and he's struggling to go up this hill, and he's like on the verge of total exhaustion at this point. And what keeps him going is the memory he was given, the favorite memory of the giver, which was Christmas morning. And it was in the same area, the same hill, and the idea that, well, what ends up happening is he comes to the top of the hill and he finds a sled, and with the last ounce of his strength he puts Gabriel on the sled and gets in, and they go down. And as he's going down the hill, he's losing consciousness, and he basically is only propelled by hope. And all the while he's been putting memories into Gabe, and it's kind of a obtuse or indirect ending, kind of similar to Inception, which is kind of a little bit frustrating. But I love this. Downward, faster and faster. Suddenly he was aware with certainty and joy that below ahead they were waiting for him, and that they were waiting too for the baby. For the first time he heard something that he knew to be music. He heard people singing behind him across vast distances of space and time from the place he had left. He thought he heard music too, but perhaps it was only an echo. And that's how it ends. So it's a totally like Inception ending, where he's spinning the top, and it's like he's made it, he's finally done it. But then it kind of has a thing where the tops keep spinning. It's a dream, but if it falls, it's reality. And they end on this cliffhanger. And it's really frustrating, but in the book it's the same idea, where it toys with you a little bit. Like, is what he's experiencing right now reality, or is it a memory? Did he actually make it? Did he end up dying and expiring, but Gabe was able to make it? And Gabriel represents like this holy message that is this angelic hope and this bounty and this newness that is being given to the world. And or maybe he does make it, and even though he passes out, he finds this idyllic family and they nurse him back to health. So there's like 3 different endings that I'm already cooking up as I'm reading this. I really like the idea though that he might expire, but Gabriel kind of makes it. And I like that idea because it's the ultimate sacrifice. It's the ultimate, in the traditional hero story, you have the boon where, the hero has to return to the society of his origin, but with a thing, a device, or an idea, a thought, or something that in turn elevates the level of existence to a higher point, so that his whole story is a revolution. Yes, you left and returned to the same place as you started, but now there's something that you're no longer here, but you're here. And so the idea is that he makes it, he brings humanity to a higher level, and the people in the town, where he's from, the community, wake up and begin to live again as humans and begin to experience the reality that was denied them. And that's this book. I didn't expect this. I really did not expect this. Evangelion, I think, has, again, a similar kind of theme. I might talk about Evangelion eventually, but is the main thing that I think, one of the main things you can take away from Evangelion is the last scene where it's LCL Shinji and LCL Rei, where it's like, hey, congratulations, we're all goo now. Great, now what? And he says, you have 2 choices. You can basically start over or keep it like this forever. And if you stay like this forever, you stay as one consciousness, one entity, but there's no segregation. There's no difference between Shinji and Rei, or Shinji and Asuka, or Shinji and his father. They're just all one entity. And because you're one entity, you can't know yourself. You can't experience the individual. And she says, wow, we could separate, but that would mean that humanity would begin, it would start over, and we would be born again into separate bodies, and we'd be born again into a new universe where all the misunderstandings, the pain of not being known, but also the joy of finally becoming known, and all the struggle we went through would return. And she asks him, is it worth it? Is it worth suffering so that you could eventually come to an equal or opposite or reciprocal passion or love? That there's a point to suffering, that there's a meaning to it, and a purpose and a point. And everyone has their own style, their own version, their own personal heaven and hell that they're dealing with. And it's the highest ideal, the highest belief that it's all for something. It all matters. The way people are misunderstood, the rude words, the rude glances, the physical illnesses, the ailments, all of the pain of humanity is for a point. And even if it's, I don't know, traditional religion or freaking Final Fantasy 14 and Walker with I forget the crystal's name, I want to say Hythlodaeus, but no, it's the other guy, Hydaelyn. The whole idea that all that suffering was for something, that it was spiritual, this is what I usually call pain spiritual currency, that it is seen and it is felt, and that you are not alone in the suffering that you go through, and that as great as the pleasures you experience and feel are as equally great as the pains and problems and struggles you go through. They are both on different sides of the spectrum of experience, but they're both equally deep and meaningful. And what was the movie before End of Eva was called? Life and Rebirth, or Death and Rebirth. Life and death, and the two axioms of everything, hate and love, and jealousy and generosity. All of these things are part of the human condition, and to deny one spectrum is to deny the other. Another thing I always say is that love and hate are just two sides of the same coin. If you choose to love something, you're going to hate the thing that is its antithesis. You can't. It's a stupid thing saying that we're against hate speech, we're against hate whatever, and it's like, you can't. If you're against hate, that means you're also against love, because it's the same thing in the opposite degree. And to be against hate means to be against love, against human experience and the depth of it. And yeah, there are very unproductive ways to vent your emotions and whatever. And I feel like I think I want you to just watch Evangelion and read this. I don't know. Humans are so bad and poor at understanding ourselves that it's no wonder why psychology has become so popular, how mental illness is such a hot topic, and how religion and rediscovering what it really means and what the real spirituality of the world is I think the most pressing or important idea in today's culture, because it's what we're losing. Just my take, no big deal. But yeah, it's the idea that, I don't know, it's the idea that there's an idea or a hope or a person or an actual concept or thing that isn't just taking away the sins of the world, but the pain of the world. It's taking away and converting those awful, terrible things into the opposite degree. This is actually a side note of something I've been thinking about recently, but it's the idea that it has to be stated somewhere explicitly in the Bible or maybe some other religion or something, but it's the concept of metaphysical transmutation of self, where you can take pain and turn it into pleasure. Actually, it does say this in the Bhagavad Gita, where he says something, I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember, that all things are just the same substance but in opposite degrees. No, that's the Kabbalion, but it says something like that in the Bhagavad Gita. It doesn't matter. But what Krishna says is that blessed is he who in pleasure remembers pain, and in pain remembers pleasure, and can be impartial to either. But what is like beyond that, and it's the idea again that your suffering has a point, it has a purpose, and it can serve to create a better self. And I remember there's this one, pastor who was doing this talk, and he made this statement that, this is a very controversial thing to say, that, a lot of people ask me, why is there suffering in the world? Why is there pain? Why are there unpleasant things in the world? Why would God make a world like that? And he said, well, I could, just brush it off and say, oh, well, original sin, we messed up, we broke the rules. And God said, well, okay, well, here you go. Here's the consequences of your actions. Oh no. But he said what I want to tell people sometimes, and you can't always say this, is that Sometimes you need to suffer so that you could learn something or better yourself. And it's very hard to hear that, but he says it's very easy to hear that once you've gone through the suffering. No one wants to hear it while they're suffering, but when you've gone through it and you look back and you realize that the experience that you went through, you've been able to help not only yourself but others, similar to, like, I don't know, Alcoholics Anonymous or those kinds of organizations. By being able to share your stories and your experiences and give that to someone else has been, it's transmuted the degree of pain into the degree of love or healing or power or acceptance. And through I like to visualize this actually as kind of like a mental engine, a converter that is taking all of your negative ideas, emotions, the intonations of your shadowy demon and transmuting it into love and acceptance and care, and going through a kind of converter of opposite hermetic degrees through the sacrifice of a savior-like figure that is there to help you do that through a series of parables and metaphors that even the simplest person can understand, as well as the most intelligent, by unpacking its metaphors and its meaning, but also not having its value lost on people. That to me is the thing. That's the thing we're gonna do. we're gonna do that, and I've decided I'm gonna do that. And again, it's just turning pain into love. It's kind of there's a Ram Dass song, or he's a speaker. I don't know. Maybe I'll link it. Whatever. But he does this thing about dark thoughts, and he says you should love your dark thoughts. And again, this is the other revelation that I've come to, which is that when you have negative thoughts, when you have painful thoughts, those thoughts are coming from your shadow. And your shadow is a component of your own psyche. And so in the way that it's trying to demoralize or destroy or give you these bad things, you recognize those thoughts as coming from a part of yourself. And when you love yourself, you realize that that shadow is a subset of yourself. And instead of fighting with the shadow or judo flipping it or doing what I like to call spiritual judo, what's more empowering and impactful is to see the shadow as, and the negative thoughts as concerned. It's like, oh, you really care about me, don't you? You care enough to tell me all these awful things about myself and about all my shortcomings and about that embarrassing thing I did 5 years ago or 10 years ago, whatever, that you really care about me. Like, you wouldn't be telling me these things unless you cared. And that's my own thought I wanted to share with you guys. It's a very practical, empowering thought, and so you want to hug and embrace and love that shadow, not because it's foreign, but because it's a part of yourself. And I think that's what Jung means when he means to integrate with the shadow. That's what it actually is. Integrating the shadow is loving that part of yourself and accepting it. There's times where I've accepted it, but actually fully embracing it and not seeing it as something to hate that's above you, but to love that's below you, and to, again, incorporate within. Like, let's sync up, basically. Another thing I was also thinking about is, the whole Evangelion, you have to sync with the Eva. You have to sync, which is, as we all know, powered by a maternal soul, no less. So you want to sync up with that higher spirit or that maternal spirit or that heavenly spirit or whatever, but also you want to sync up with your lower spirit as well and incorporate that as well as the higher. I kind of saw it as dialectic where you had to choose, good or bad, but it's accepting both. And I don't know, that's my current revelation I wanted to share with you guys because of this, of all things. Again, anyway, very simple book. I read it in 2 days. I did 100 pages each day, very fast, very quick. Great book, very fun. Definitely surprised me and definitely might surprise you. But yeah, I would definitely give this a read. And I know there's a couple movies based on this. I haven't seen them, so I can't recommend them. I don't know what they're like, but one thing I do have to say that I thought was really cool is in that final scene where he's running away from society, all I had playing in my head was the song Run Boy Run by Woodkid, and that song with the mental image of what Jonas was going through was just pure Kino to me. And if I had to direct a movie based on this, that would be the entire last section would be a montage with that song in it. And because like the lyrics are like, "Run boy run, they're trying to get you, break out of society." And yeah, and it begins with the tolling of the bells. Like it's a very heavy experience. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. My feeling, my emotions, my whatever, it's all here. It's all me. It's all real and genuine, as real as Jonas's experience. But yeah. Anyway, guys, take care, and as always, keep reading. Bye-bye.